So a little background on Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities for those who don't know us. We are a municipal water provider, but we're also a municipal utility. So we are part of Salt Lake City. We are an enterprise fund, which means our utilities are self-supporting. So each utility has to earn its own revenue through either sales or connection fees or whatever the other process might be. We deliver culinary water. We have sewer, stormwater, street lighting now, which is really fun and new for us. And our water also includes watershed management. So we're a very large utility with a lot of different things happening. And each of those utilities is a distinct and separate company, if you will, within the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities. So some of our values, I'm not going to read this all up. I think we share all this stuff. It's about, we think of ourselves first and foremost as a public health agency. We are in the business of providing not only water to our community, but collecting sewer, helping prevent flood, managing and protecting our watersheds, and now making our streets safe as well. And that is first and foremost our driving mission. We try to be responsible with our assets so that we respect our customers. We have a long history of operation, and we have always been very transparent in how we operate. And as a matter of fact, I was just trying to do the math, and I think we're about 132 years old. We implement our programs with accountability both to the City Council and the Mayor's office, but also to the community we serve. And we support all of our enterprises so that the city flourishes. We support and protect quality of life, and we support goals around economic development and sustainability. So as a drinking water utility, we service over 350,000 people. Now, our drinking water service area is larger than our other service areas. We provide water outside of our geopolitical boundary. So we provide water to Cottonwood Heights, Mill Creek City. I used to say Mill Creek Township, but now I have to remember to say Mill Creek City, Holiday City, portions of Murray, and South and North Salt Lake. And we not only deliver that water, but we also provide the distribution system for that water as well. So we maintain that system. For sewer, stormwater, and street lighting, it's all within the geopolitical boundary of Salt Lake City, so it's about 185,000 people. So one of our complexities in terms of the work I do as the water conservation manager is working through that boundary of sometimes I'm in the city, but I also have customers outside of the city. In fact, almost half of my customers are outside of the boundary of Salt Lake City. We get our water sources from a variety of locations. So we have creeks and streams, we have reservoirs. Some of them are not our reservoirs. Deer Creek Jordanelle system is not ours. The Mountain Dell, Little Dell system is ours. We developed, Mountain Dell is about 100 years old, if I recall, and Little Dell was built after the 1983 flood or 88 floods as a stormwater project, but it's turning out to be a very good water reservoir. We also have some groundwater supplies. One of the complexities of our drought planning process is that we don't control or own all of our water supply. So as we're working through the system, how do we ensure that the agencies of which we're partners with, as well as our community, are all connected and that we are on the same plan and path in this process. In fact, what I'll be talking about today more than details of the plan is how we're doing this process with a complex utility and a complex water system. So the current Water Conservation Shortage Plan, which was written in 2003, I can say this in all earnestness, it wasn't a great plan. I was the primary author, so I was new to this job, and I was in the middle of a drought. It's like, Stephanie, you need to write us a drought plan. It's like, okay. And I actually read about 20 drought plans, including Denver's and Phoenix's and a number of others. And one of the things we learned in writing our drought plan that they shared with me as one of their shortcomings is though their drought plan looked at things like storage and surface water and supply, they failed to look at demand. So how is the community responding to drought alerts and information and education so that as water use declined, though their storage levels were still very low, it made them stay within this legislative drought stage, and they felt they didn't have enough flexibility. So when we wrote our 2004 plan, I think that the strongest component was that we included demand as a trigger component or factor so that we could respond both to supply and demand. So as supplies dwindle, the messaging to the community was very specific. If you use less, we avoid restrictions. If you use less, we don't have as much of a shortage. If you use less, you'll help us get through the next year. And it was a very, very effective messaging tool. During the drought of 2001 through 2004, we only entered stage 2 of our drought, which meant that the only mandated restrictions were actually on municipal sites. So our community was able to avoid restrictions, in part because they are very firmly a collaborative partner in achieving our reduction goals. The shortcoming of our plan was our triggers themselves in terms of storage and supply. Looking back, currently, as we look at our existing plan, one of the issues is we didn't really know how we got to those triggers. So no one really knew how they were established, where they came from. We couldn't fully justify them, so it was hard to know, are we in a stage 1 drought? Is it a stage 2 drought? May we have slipped into 3? We don't know. So one of the things we wanted to focus on, one of the reasons to do this update, was to re-examine our triggers and to make sure that they were defensible, sensible, flexible, and communicativable. Ooh, is that a word? I just invented a word. The other thing we did was a response summary. Our response summary is by stages, and it has categories for different user groups. So residential use, commercial use, municipal, commercial, industrial, and then institutional, so parks, golf, and things like that. And within each stage, as you move through the stage, then there are specific recommendations within those stages. We use this as a communication tool as well, so we were able to take sections of it. It's in a table format. Again, there's no point showing it to you. It's going to be going away. So, and we've seen great examples of these. So it helped us communicate messages well, but what we didn't have in our current plan is we don't have all of this. We didn't have a public process in developing the plan. We don't have monitors. We don't have a vulnerability section. We didn't have a mitigation section. We didn't have an administrative and operational framework. So when we're in a drought, who does what? When we're in a stage 1, who's responsible for messaging? Who's monitoring what? Where does that information go? In fact, one of the things we discovered as we were looking at this process was that we have dozens of sources of water, and we have dozens of different divisions and employees and teams measuring and monitoring it, but they're all reporting this water into their own sector, if you will, and there isn't a single house where we combine all of that in a way that's meaningful and that gets the information to the people who need to make these decisions. So our 2018 plan update is intending to fill these gaps. The other challenges we had that weren't addressed in our 2004 plan is we didn't talk about climate change. We didn't talk about our discrete sources of water. We had water quality issues that we need to address. For instance, in the last few years, for those of you who are from this area, the algal blooms in the Utah Lake system are a big issue. And Salt Lake City doesn't use that water directly, but we have something that's a fun little thing called exchange agreements. So 120 years ago, when the utility was forming, a bunch of other water companies were also forming at the same time. That water, some of those water rights were taken by these small companies that delivered water to irrigators for agricultural purposes, but now a lot of that water is used in urban settings. Salt Lake City made agreements to exchange that high-quality drinking water from the Wasatch for water in Utah Lake. So we pump water from Utah Lake, give that to the irrigation companies to deliver to their customers, and we get really nice water out of the Wasatch, which is clean, needs less treatment, is high quality. The problem is in a drought, we still have to meet those exchange agreements. So even when we have drinking water shortages, we have to provide that water to our agricultural exchange agreements. And when Utah Lake is unavailable because either the water level drops or because the water level falls below the pump line, we still have to meet those exchange agreements. So it's water quality then becomes a real issue for us, because then as that water, Utah Lake water diminishes, algae grows, we can't deliver that water. It also gets into some of our other canals where we're delivering some exchange water. So water quality is an important part of our drought planning process. We also have regulatory issues, infrastructure, all of that stuff that all of you in the water business know. Some of our other challenges in terms of our drought planning process, as I mentioned, we have 4 distinct utilities. They all have planning processes of their own, and because they're all dealing with water in some way or another, except for street lighting, I'm still working on the link there. They all touch on drought. So I needed to make sure as we were beginning this process that we included every single utility in our planning process. And by utility, I mean internal utilities, our sewer group, our stormwater group, our watershed group. We have a lot of concurrent planning processes. Right now, in the middle of our drought planning process, we also have a climate change assessment process going on. We're updating our major conveyance study, which is about our water supply and delivery systems. We're updating our watershed master plan. It will include a wildfire plan, and it also includes an additional climate assessment for impacts to the watershed. So all these things are happening at the same time. Then what I need to make sure, part of my job as the project manager for the drought planning process, is that whatever they're doing, that I also acknowledge within our plan and don't do anything that messes up their plan, and vice versa. So there's a lot of parts here to juggle, and that's just the internal stakeholders. External stakeholders, we have Central Utah Water Conservancy District, which we're a member agency of, and they're an important supplier of some of our water. We have Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy, which provides another component of our source. We don't really have member cities because we're not a wholesaler, but we provide water to Cottonwood Heights, Holiday, Mill Creek. These communities need to know what we're doing, and they need to be part of our planning process, because in a drought, to be successful, they have to participate because they use roughly half of our water. We have a lot of different sources with a lot of different impacts. Not a single source has the same vulnerabilities, and we have a lot of different monitoring processes, recording processes, work groups, divisions that are measuring and monitoring and have their own unique methodologies. So I'm learning to juggle. So our process wanted to focus on a number of things. One is we're focusing on the monitoring, vulnerability, and mitigation. We're focusing on this public process. So we developed a task force of experts outside the utility who bring a variety of expertise and voices and opinions. We have an internal project team of about 25 utility employees. We have a consultant firm, Bowen Collins, is helping us both with some engineering modeling and some of the public process. And we're also including a robust public outreach program. Now, our drought process is being funded in part through a grant through the Bureau of Reclamation. And we submitted all our paperwork. We submitted our work plan. Their only criticism was the communication plan initially. They thought it was lacking in depth. And it was true. So we happily reapproached it and rewrote it. It's now a robust 10-page document, which we're already implementing, and we've already been conducting public meetings. So the communication plan not only helped us address more fully how we communicate internally, but also how we're communicating to our task force and stakeholders, but also to the community at large. Because again, in the end, we can plan all we want to plan, but it's the folks turning on the tap that will really drive whether or not we're successful in whatever drought planning we try to accomplish. So some of our task force, I wrote this in really small print, and the reason is because, well, we have our larger regional state. So we have the Division of Water Resources, we have the Central Utah, we have Metro, but then we have our county agency. So, well, Salt Lake County is participating, and Watershed is participating, Lynn Burney over there. We have the Department of Health, because again, water is always a public health issue, and drought affects public health very directly. So the county health department is participating. And then we have other agencies. So we have our member cities. We have internal city agencies separate from the utility. So we have our parks department, we have golf, we have sustainability, planning and zoning, because planning and zoning affects water use patterns. We have the Department of Economic Development, because if we have to do restrictions or if we have other issues around water, then it would be probably good to let the Economic Development Department know that this may not be time to recruit a big bottling company to come into Salt Lake City. Yeah, I don't want to get fired. We also have our academic partners. So Utah State University and University of Utah are participating. And we have all these other nonprofits and NGOs. We have Western Water Assessment, Seth and his group. We've got the Nature Conservancy, Water Resource Advocates, the Chamber of Commerce, the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, Jordan River Commission, and it goes on. So all of these different groups are participating, and this is sort of like herding cats, but they're really, really smart cats, and they're really independent cats, which is good, but they're really smart cats. So how we're balancing the synergies between these different utilities. The Watershed Plan, for instance, has an aspect of climate change, fire danger, and pressures related to growth. Well, those are things that synergize or net in well to our drought planning process, because we have to look at climate change. Wildfire danger is an important part of what we do because we're responsible for protecting and managing the watershed that serves our community and other communities. And growth is an issue. We have the growth we're looking at mostly for our plan is within the city boundary. But also if development occurs more in the watershed, we're also going to have to provide water potentially to some of that development. So there's a lot of linkages here. So the way we're bridging this linkage is there's an individual who is part of the watershed planning process who's part of our staff stakeholding group. And so she helps make sure that whatever we develop is in concert with the Watershed Master Plan and vice versa. And she also makes sure that our messaging gets to them so that those processes are well linked. We share a lot of documentation. And this is going to be very important so that as they develop their plan again, and we develop our plan, they work well together because we are, after all, serving the same area, the same community, and work at the same utility. We have our major conveyance study update. Now, one of the benefits here is that Bowen Collins is the engineering firm helping with this, and they're also helping, they're our consultant with the drought plan. The linkages here are, the major conveyance study looks at our collection, or not collection, that's sewer, sorry, our treatment and our distribution and our storage capacities. Those issues affect how we do drought planning. What are our vulnerabilities? Well, in the major conveyance study, that study can look more in depth at how we're addressing conveyance issues in the drought plan. So it'll help us understand more deeply where our vulnerabilities lie within our system. The other thing it'll help us look at is understand issues around the transmission facilities. There's a component, because we're doing a drought plan, and I had learned about the major conveyance study update, I asked that we include in the scope of work a impact of climate change on our storage capacity and other aspects, and also impacts of climate change on demand. We assume that that when we're in a drought, demand goes up. Our last couple of droughts, our records indicate that we were able to drive demand down. But where are the most critical messages about how water might be used in a drought differently than in a non-drought period? And so this study will help us identify more fully what those distinctions are. But the other thing it will also do is, I know a lot of, Utah isn't highly industrialized necessarily. It's still a really strong ag state. We have a lot of we have some light manufacturing, a lot of retail, a lot of recreation and outdoor. Salt Lake City, 50%, we have 90,000 connections. 12% of those connections, 12 to 14, are commercial, industrial, and institutional connections. So we have a really strong commercial industrial base. Those 12 to 14% connections use 50% of our water. So commercial industrial water use is really important. And I don't know how they all use water. And I don't know how they can help us in a drought. So we need to understand more fully not only how businesses are using water in industry. I mean, I can't pick up a phone and tell Tesoro to reduce their water use by 20%. What does that mean? I mean, we can't drive business out, so we need to understand better our industrial commercial sector. So part of the scope of work for the major conveyance study will be to examine some of these differences. We're also developing what we're calling the CII tool to help us deeply analyze data collected from industrial commercial water users that we've been collecting over the 50 some odd years we've been recording data on meter usage. So that's part of the major conveyance study. So the synergies there are that they're helping us explore some of these demand aspects, and they're also helping us do a deeper understanding of some conveyance and transmission aspects. Climate study that's being conducted right now with U of U that feeds into each of these processes. So the climate study is feeding into the Watershed Master Plan, the drought planning process, and the major conveyance study. And that's mostly looking at how climate change will affect watershed, also precipitation events, snowpack, drainage, all of that. Variabilities, projections, all the things we've all been talking about with climate change right now. Our wastewater master plan update. Yes, the drought plan has a tie-in to our wastewater master plan update. One is frequently in drought planning processes and as a mitigation measure, communities turn to secondary water or reuse water as a solution for making up culinary water shortages. We're trying to determine if this is really the best choice for Salt Lake City. For one thing, our waste stream is treated to a high level. It's a high quality level. It could be used for irrigation purposes, but our waste treatment plant is at the bottom of our hill. We have a elevation range of 1,200 feet, so we pump water up 1,200 feet. So pumping wastewater, or retreated wastewater, reused water up that high would bring its own challenges and expenses and energy demand. There might be other benefits for using that water, for instance, supporting environmental aspects, supporting wetlands. Right now, the water from the waste treatment plant is some of the highest quality water going into the Great Salt Lake. So that may not be our best use of that water in terms of using it for irrigation uses or other uses, but it might serve a role to help us support environmental concerns during times of drought. So we even have a component in our drought plan that addresses our waste treatment plant and vice versa. Stormwater, slightly less linkage. It has a closer tie to our conservation master plan, which is in the process of being updated. But one of the aspects here is, since we're developing wetlands to help treat our stormwater in times of drought, how does that affect our ability to treat stormwater? So we're looking at how some of our mitigation measures, for instance, reuse water or increasing connectivity in our stormwater system might help us be able to continue to support this aspect of our stormwater system and still support our drought plan overall. Conservation planning, there's a lot of linkage with our conservation planning effort. In fact, our drought plan is housed within our conservation plan. We see this drought planning process right now as really a phase one. Next year, we're going to be updating our water conservation master plan because it's due to the Division of Water Resources next year. We need to chat. And then what I see is after that plan is developed, and at that point, the major conveyance study will be completed, the climate assessment will be completed, and the watershed master plan will be completed. We'll revisit the drought plan, bring back in our task force members, and integrate those completed plans into the drought plan and finish it. So a lot of talk has been on about how did we make these plans not be static. And for me, a big part of it is that these plans are my job description. So the conservation master plan, the drought plan, this is what I do every day. So keeping them really current is very important. So in conclusion, it's me and my pal up by our Lake Mary Reservoir hanging out. Our primary goal with our drought plan is to continue to protect our community, even in times of drought and water shortages, both currently and in the future. We want to enhance the connectivity between all of our internal divisions and work groups, but also our outside divisions, broader within the city planning efforts, but also to our stakeholders and within our community. This kind of goes back to the peanut butter thing. So one of the things I was thinking about as I was trying to get pills and peanut butter into a 90-pound dog who was a little bit resistant was this notion that drought planning, in a sense, is a process to help us think how to make more palatable actions, responses, things that are occurring that could be unpleasant, negative, even scary. And while we might not be able to make it all palatable, maybe we can make it all go down easier. And so these plans help us be real, they need to be workable, and we can't mess things up. That's my goal.